My ex-wife and her lawyer lover took everything in the divorce. All three houses, the cars, $8 million in assets, even custody of my grown children. "You lost," she declared with a smile. It was a smile I will never forget. "You have nothing left." And she was right. At the age of 70, I was broke, humiliated, and forgotten, left alone on the streets. But then, I went to close the old savings account belonging to my grandfather, Frederick, an account I figured had $50, tops. The bank manager went pale when he checked the records. "Sir, this account has been active and generating interest since 1948. He swiveled the screen toward me and showed me the statement. What I saw left me completely speechless. But before I get to that moment, you need to understand who I was. You need to see everything I built, everything I loved, and everything they stole from me. Because only then will you understand why what I found in that bank wasn't just money. It was divine justice. My name is Elijah, but everyone calls me Eli. I am 70 years old, and for 40 of those years, I built an empire from the ground up. I started out selling insurance door to door under the relentless Los Angeles sun, wearing a borrowed suit and shoes that were 2 sizes too big. I walked 12 miles a day, knocked on 100 doors, and heard 99 rejections. But that one single yes, that one client who trusted me was worth gold. I saved every penny for 5 years until I could open my own agency. Then came the real estate investments, back when no one was betting on certain neighborhoods. I bought properties others considered trash and polished them into jewels. By the time I turned 50, I owned 3 estates in the best areas of California. I drove a black Mercedes-Benz S-Class that shone like a mirror and had more money in the bank than my father made in his entire lifetime. But what I was most proud of wasn't the properties or the luxury cars. It was my family. Camilla and I married when I was 35. She was beautiful, with those green eyes that seemed to read your soul, and a laugh that could light up any room. We met at a business dinner. I was nervous, awkwardly trying to impress a big client when I spilled red wine all over the white tablecloth. Everyone went silent, but she laughed, a genuine, warm laugh, and said, finally, someone with the nerve to ruin something perfect. That night, I knew I would marry her. We had 2 children. Brianna arrived first, with her mother's eyes and my stubbornness. 3 years later, Marcus was born, quiet and observant, but with a huge heart. I watched them grow up, took them to school, and was there for every basketball game and every piano recital. I paid for top-tier universities, and I taught them the value of hard work. I showed them that money is important, but integrity is more so. When Marcus graduated as a lawyer and Brianna became a doctor, I cried with pride. My life made sense. Everything I had worked for, every sacrifice, every extra hour, had been worth it. Camilla and I celebrated 35 years of marriage. 35 years sharing the same bed, the same mornings, the same dreams. Or so I believed. Something started to change 2 years ago, so subtly that I barely noticed it at first. Small things. She started coming home late, always with the same excuse. Meetings with her lawyer about some distant aunt's inheritance paperwork. "It's complicated, Eli," she'd say while checking her phone. "Ethan says it could take months to sort out." Ethan. Her lawyer. A man of 45, perfectly slicked hair, tailored Italian suits, and a used car salesman's smile. I met him once at a dinner. He shook my hand too hard and called me friend too many times. Something about him made me uneasy. But Camilla insisted he was the best attorney in the city. The meetings grew more frequent, twice a week, then 3 times, then almost every day. She dressed up more than usual to go see him. New perfume, dresses I didn't remember buying her. When I asked, she'd laugh and say, "Oh, Eli, are you getting paranoid? Can't I just look good?" And I wanted to believe her. After 35 years together, I wanted to believe my wife wouldn't lie to me, that the love we had built was stronger than any temptation. But love sometimes blinds us, and I was completely blind. One night, I came home early. She wasn't expecting me until 9, but I closed a deal quickly and decided to surprise her with dinner at her favorite restaurant. I walked in the front door, my keys jingling against the entryway table. I heard her laugh coming from the study. That laugh I knew so well, but it sounded different, more intimate, more complicit. I crept closer and listened to her on the phone. No, he doesn't suspect a thing. He's just a silly old fool who only thinks about his business. By the time he figures it out, it will all be ours. Silence. Then that laugh again. "I love you, Ethan. Just a little more patience." The world stopped. My heart paused for an eternal second. I wanted to rush in, confront her, and scream. But something held me back. Maybe it was survival instinct, or maybe it was the fear of confirming what I had just heard. I backed away silently, left the house, and drove aimlessly for hours. The city lights blurred through the tears. I couldn't stop. 35 years of my life given to a woman who was now conspiring to steal everything from me. That night, I slept in a cheap motel. I couldn't go back home. I couldn't look her in the eyes knowing what I knew. The next day, I hired a private investigator. It cost a fortune, but I needed proof. I needed to know how long this had been going on, how deep the betrayal ran. The results came 3 weeks later. Photos of Camilla and Ethan entering hotels together, records of calls that lasted hours, emails where they planned every detail of how to take everything from me. Ethan, the brilliant lawyer, had found legal loopholes, technicalities, ways to make me look like the villain. And Camilla, my wife, the mother of my children, helped him with every intimate detail of our finances, our properties, and my life. I confronted Camilla one Monday morning. I placed the photos on the breakfast table while she sipped her coffee. She went pale for a second, just 1 second. Then she smiled. That cold smile I'd never seen before. "So what are you going to do, Eli? Divorce me? Go ahead. Ethan already has everything prepared." And she was right, because what I didn't know was that the trap was already set. The most brilliant lawyer in the city against a 70-year-old man who trusted in justice. I didn't stand a chance. The divorce proceedings began 3 days after that conversation. Camilla moved out of the main house that same afternoon, taking only 1 suitcase, as if she were the victim in all this. Neighbors saw her leave with tears in her eyes, playing the role of the abandoned wife to perfection. I stayed in that enormous house, surrounded by silence and the ghosts of what my family once was. The walls seemed to judge me. Every photo of our happy years became a cruel mockery. But the worst part wasn't losing her. The worst part was what came next. Ethan moved like a shark that smells blood in the water. The divorce petition reached my hands a week later, and when I opened it, I couldn't believe what I was reading. Camilla accused me of emotional abuse, financial control, and manipulating her for decades. She claimed I forced her to sign documents without reading them, constantly threatened her, and that she lived terrified in her own home. Every word was a perfectly constructed lie, every accusation designed to destroy me. And the worst part, they had witnesses. People I thought were my friends, business associates, even the housekeeper who had worked in my home for 15 years. All of them testified in her favor, all of them lying with a conviction that chilled me to the bone. I hired the best lawyer I could find, an older man with 50 years of experience who assured me that the truth always comes out. "Don't worry, Mr. Hawthorne," he said, patting me on the shoulder. "We have evidence of your good character, your honest work. No judge is going to believe a woman who is clearly lying." But what my lawyer didn't understand was that Ethan wasn't playing fair. He knew every twist and turn of the legal system, every judge, every clerk in every courthouse. He knew exactly what buttons to press and when to press them. On the day of the first hearing, I arrived early in a crisp, tailored suit, with the hope that justice would be on my side. I saw Camilla enter on Ethan's arm, dressed in black, wearing dark glasses, as if she were in mourning. She looked frail, broken, perfectly vulnerable. I, on the other hand, looked exactly what she wanted me to look like: a rich, powerful, intimidating man, the type of man who could abuse his wife without anyone suspecting. The judge was a woman in her 50s, with a severe gaze and an impenetrable expression. She listened to Camilla's case first. Ethan spoke for 40 minutes, painting me as a monster. He described supposed nights of terror, screaming, and threats. He talked about how I controlled every dime Camilla spent, isolated her from her family, and made her feel insignificant. When it was my turn to speak, my lawyer presented our evidence: photographs of happy family vacations, testimony from neighbors who never heard a single shout, and bank records showing Camilla had full access to our accounts. But every time we presented something, Ethan had a response. "The photographs are staged, Your Honor. My client was smiling in public because she was afraid of the consequences. The neighbors never heard anything because the abuse was psychological, not physical. And yes, she had access to the money, but only under the constant supervision of her husband. Everything he said sounded convincing, professional, and rehearsed. And I could see in the judge's eyes that she was starting to believe him." The hearing ended without a resolution. The judge said she needed time to review all the evidence and would schedule a new date. I left that courthouse feeling the floor move beneath my feet. My lawyer tried to calm me down, saying these things take time, that we had to be patient. But I knew something was wrong. I could feel it in my bones. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how I had arrived at this point, when my perfect life had turned into this nightmare. The following weeks were a bureaucratic hell. More hearings, more lies, more paid witnesses who claimed to have seen me behave aggressively. Ethan brought in a psychologist who diagnosed Camilla with post-traumatic stress disorder caused by years of abuse. He brought in falsified medical records showing doctor visits for anxiety and depression. Every piece of evidence was a masterpiece of legal manipulation. And all I could do was watch as my reputation, built over 40 years of honest work, crumbled in a matter of weeks. But what truly destroyed me was when Ethan filed his demand for the assets. He didn't just want half of everything. He wanted Camilla to keep all 3 houses, because, according to him, I had bought them with the intention of controlling her. He wanted the cars because Camilla needed safe transportation after the trauma I had caused her. and he wanted full access to the bank accounts because I had supposedly hidden money. $8 million in assets that we had accumulated together over 35 years of marriage. And he was asking that everything, absolutely everything, go to her. My lawyer said it was ridiculous, that no judge would grant that. But he was wrong, because Ethan had an ace up his sleeve that none of us saw coming. At the next hearing, he presented documents that supposedly proved I had diverted funds from my company to personal accounts, evading taxes for years. The documents looked legitimate, with my signature, with official seals, but I had never seen those papers in my life. They were perfect forgeries, so good that even my own lawyer doubted me for a moment. "Eli," he asked me privately, "is there anything you haven't told me? Because if these documents are real, we are in serious trouble." I swore to him that I had never done anything illegal in my life, that I paid my taxes religiously, that every cent of my company was registered and documented. But Ethan had done his work too well. The fake documents looked so real that the judge ordered a complete investigation of my finances. For 3 months, auditors reviewed every transaction, every receipt, every bank movement from the last 10 years. And although they found nothing illegal, the damage was already done. My reputation was destroyed. The local papers published articles about the businessman accused of fraud and abuse. Clients canceled contracts. Business partners stopped returning my calls. My name, which had once opened doors, now slammed them shut. And then came the worst of all. Brianna and Marcus, my children, my babies, sided with their mother. Camilla filled their heads with lies. She told them I had been an absent and controlling father, that she had suffered in silence for years to protect them. And they believed her. Or perhaps they didn't believe her, but money speaks louder than blood. Camilla promised them part of the inheritance if they testified in her favor. And they did. My daughter, the doctor, who studied with my money, stood up in front of the judge and said that I was emotionally distant, that I never showed her real love. My son, the lawyer who should understand how legal manipulation works, declared that he had seen signs of control throughout his childhood. Their words cut through me like knives. Every lie they uttered was a direct stab to the heart. The final hearing arrived on a gray Friday in November. The sky was covered with dark clouds, as if the universe knew what was coming. The courtroom was packed. Camilla and Ethan sat on the other side with barely contained expressions of victory. My children were in the front row, not looking at me. My lawyer was next to me, with a folder that felt terribly thin compared to the mountain of documents Ethan had presented. The judge entered, and we all stood. She sat down and opened her folder and began to read the verdict in a monotonous voice that betrayed no emotion. After reviewing all the evidence presented, this court determines that Ms. Camilla Rourke is entitled to the entirety of the marital property due to proven emotional and financial abuse. My heart stopped. All 3 residences will be transferred to her name. I felt like I couldn't breathe. The vehicles, the bank accounts, and all assets valued at approximately $8 million will remain in her custody. My hands began to tremble. Furthermore, the custody of the minor children. But Brianna and Marcus were adults. What was she talking about? Pardon, I correct. This court recommends that the adult children maintain distance from the defendant until he completes mandatory psychological treatment. The judge continued reading, but I no longer heard words, only a constant ringing in my ears. My lawyer placed a hand on my shoulder, but I shrugged it off. I didn't want comfort. I didn't want compassion. I just wanted to wake up from this nightmare. When the judge finished reading, she struck her gavel against the table. The sound resonated in the room like a gunshot. Court is adjourned. It was over. 40 years of work, of sacrifice, of building an honest life, erased in an instant by the signature of a judge who never bothered to know the truth. I remained seated as everyone stood up. I watched Camilla walk toward the exit on Ethan's arm. Before crossing the door, she turned and looked straight into my eyes, and then she smiled. It wasn't a subtle or nervous smile. It was a wide, triumphant smile, full of pure venom. Ethan whispered something in her ear, and she laughed. That laugh sliced through the silence of the room like a knife. And in that moment, I knew this had never been about love or pain. It had been about money from the beginning. I was just a bank that she had been emptying for years, waiting for the perfect moment to close the account permanently. My children followed them out without looking at me. Brianna walked quickly, head down, as if she were ashamed, but not enough to stop. Marcus gave me a quick glance, something that might have been guilt, or perhaps just discomfort. But neither of them approached. Neither of them said a word. The room emptied in minutes, and I remained there, nailed to that hard wooden chair, unable to move. My lawyer finally spoke. Eli, I'm so sorry. We can appeal? I raised a hand to stop him. There was nothing left to do. Ethan had won, Camilla had won, and I had lost absolutely everything. I left the courthouse like a ghost. The sun was shining outside. People walked down the streets, laughing and talking, completely oblivious to the fact that my world had just collapsed. I sat on a park bench in front of the building and simply breathed. I inhaled, exhaled. I tried to process what had just happened, but my brain refused to accept it. How was it possible that in a single day, I lost 3 houses, all my savings, my cars, and even the respect of my own children? How was it possible that 35 years of marriage ended with a woman stealing everything from me while the legal system applauded her? The following days were a haze of lawyers, papers, and humiliation. I had to vacate the main house in less than a week. Camilla wanted to move in immediately with Ethan, turning my home into their love nest. I packed my belongings into cardboard boxes that smelled of dampness. 40 years of life reduced to 12 boxes. Clothes, a few books, photographs I didn't want to look at but couldn't throw away. The rest, the furniture, the artwork, the memories, all stayed. Everything was hers now. The day I left, I didn't look back. I couldn't. If I had turned to see that house one last time, I think I would have collapsed right there on the driveway. I moved to a tiny apartment in the cheap side of town, a one-bedroom place with thin walls where I could hear the neighbors arguing every night. The bathroom had mold in the corners, and the kitchen was so small that barely one person could fit. But it was the only thing I could afford, because it turns out that when you lose $8 million in a divorce, you also lose access to credit, to loans, to any kind of financial help. Banks looked at me as a risk. We're sorry, Mr. Hawthorne, but given your recent legal situation, the phrase was always left unfinished. But the message was clear. I was a pariah now. My friends disappeared one by one. At first, they called, sent messages saying they regretted what had happened. But when I asked for help, when I needed work or simply someone to talk to, the excuses started. I'm too busy right now. Eli. It's not a good time. Camilla is my wife's friend. You understand the position this puts me in, right? In 2 months, my contact list was reduced to almost nothing. The people I had shared dinners, trips, and business deals with simply erased me from their lives as if I had never existed. That's how the world works when you fall. No one wants to be near the loser, because defeat might be contagious. I tried calling my children dozens of times. Brianna never answered. Her calls went straight to voicemail. I left messages at first, pleading for her to listen to me, to give me a chance to explain my side. But after 20 unanswered messages, I stopped trying. Marcus answered once, only once. His voice sounded cold, distant. Dad, Mom told us everything. How you manipulated her for years. How you made her believe she was nothing without you. I need time to process this. I told him it was all a lie, that his mother and Ethan had orchestrated everything. He sighed. That's exactly what a manipulator would say. And he hung up. He didn't answer my calls again. The nights were the worst. I sat in that miserable apartment with the sound of police sirens in the distance and neighbors fighting through the walls, wondering how I had gotten here. At 70 years old, after a lifetime of hard work and correct decisions, I was completely alone. No family, no friends, no money, no purpose. There were nights when I considered just giving up, stopping the fight, accepting that this was my life now, and that there was no way to change it. But something inside me, a last vestige of pride or perhaps simple stubbornness, refused to surrender completely. I looked for work, but no one wanted to hire a 70-year-old man with a recent legal scandal. You're overqualified. We're looking for someone younger. Your personal situation is complicated. Translation: you're old, problematic, and a risk. I ended up taking odd jobs, minor repairs for neighbors, moving furniture. Once, I spent an entire weekend painting a house for $200. I, who had managed million-dollar contracts, was now earning pennies doing manual labor that wrecked my back and knees. But I needed to eat. I needed to pay the rent for that hole I called home. One day, 3 months after the divorce, I was walking downtown when I saw Camilla and Ethan. They were leaving an expensive restaurant, the kind of place where we used to celebrate anniversaries. She wore a red dress I had never seen before. Jewelry glittered in the sun. Ethan held her by the waist, possessive, proud. They looked happy, radiant, living the perfect life with my money, in my houses, driving my cars. I hid behind a pole so they wouldn't see me, not out of fear, but because I couldn't bear the thought of them seeing me like this, destroyed, broken, defeated. That night, I hit rock bottom. I sat on the floor of my apartment, surrounded by bills I couldn't pay, and cried. I cried like I hadn't cried since I was a child. Tears of rage, of powerlessness, of pure despair. Why had I worked so hard? To end up like this, alone and ruined, while the people who betrayed me enjoyed the fruits of my labor? It wasn't fair. None of this was fair. But justice, I learned that night, it is not something the world owes you. It's something you have to fight to achieve. The next day, while organizing the few belongings I had left, I found an old box buried at the bottom of the closet. It belonged to my grandfather, Frederick. He had died when I was 20, but before he left, he had given me a few things: old papers, yellowed photographs, and a notebook where he wrote down his thoughts. I opened the box for the first time in decades, and the smell of old paper hit me. There was a photograph of him and my grandmother on their wedding day. They looked so young, so full of hope. And beneath the photograph, I found something I had completely forgotten. A small, faded green bank passbook with corners curled by time. I opened it curiously. It was a savings account from the First National Trust that my grandfather had opened in 1948. I looked at the numbers written by hand in faded blue ink. The last recorded deposit was $50 in 1952. After that, nothing. The account had been forgotten for over 70 years. It was probably closed or inactive. But something clicked in my head, a tiny spark of curiosity amid all my despair. What if the account still existed? What if there was something in there, even if it was just those $50? It wasn't much. But in my current situation, $50 meant food for a week. I decided to go to the bank the next day. I had nothing to lose. The First National Trust still existed, though it was now part of a larger chain. The nearest branch was 40 minutes away by bus. I put on my only suit, the same one I had worn to the trial, now wrinkled and with a coffee stain I could never quite remove. I took the passbook and left early in the morning. The bus ride was long and filled with people going to jobs they hated. I arrived at the bank at 9 in the morning. It was a modern building, all glass and steel, very different from the old branches I remembered from my youth. I walked in with the passbook tightly held in my sweaty hand. The receptionist looked at me with that professional smile they give you when they assume you're not important. "How can I help you?" I showed her the passbook. "I need to verify if this account still exists." She took it, frowned at the date, and asked me to wait. I sat in one of those uncomfortable chairs in the waiting room, surrounded by people conducting important business while I chased a ghost from 1948. 20 minutes passed, then 30. I started to think I had made a mistake, that this was a waste of time. But then an older man appeared, about 60 years old, with thick glasses and a gray suit. "Mr. Hawthorne?" I stood up. "Yes." "I'm Joseph, the manager of this branch. Could you please accompany me to my office?" There was something in his tone that made me nervous. He didn't sound like someone about to tell me the account was closed. He sounded like someone who had just seen something he didn't expect. We walked in silence down a marble-floored hallway to his office. He closed the door behind us and gestured for me to sit. He sat down in front of his computer and started typing. His face was pale. "Mr. Hawthorne," he said without looking at me, "do you have any identification that proves your relationship with Frederick Hawthorne?" I pulled out my ID. My last name was Hawthorne. Frederick had been my paternal grandfather. Joseph checked my documents, then looked back at the screen. He took a deep breath. "Sir, this account exists. It is active and has been generating compound interest since 1948. The world stopped. "What?" My voice came out as a whisper. Joseph swiveled the screen toward me, and then I saw it, the account balance. My eyes scanned the numbers once, twice, 3 times, unable to process them. It couldn't be real. It simply couldn't be real. $127 million. The room began to spin. I felt like I couldn't breathe. That can't be right." My voice trembled. Joseph nodded slowly. "I verified it 3 times. Your grandfather deposited $50 in 1948. The account was never closed. It has been accumulating interest for 77 years. With the bank's original interest rate and changes in policies over the decades, the amount has grown exponentially." I couldn't speak. I couldn't think. $127 million. An forgotten account, a piece of green paper that had been stored in a box for decades while I struggled, worked it, and built an empire from scratch. And all that time, this fortune had been silently waiting for me. "There's something else," Joseph said. He got up and went to an antique filing cabinet in the corner of his office. He pulled out a yellowed folder and extracted a sealed envelope from it. "This was attached to the account, specific instructions from your grandfather. It was to be given to the beneficiary when they accessed the account for the first time." I took the envelope with trembling hands. It was sealed with old red wax, the kind no one uses anymore. My name was written on the front in my grandfather's elegant handwriting. Elijah Hawthorne. To be opened when you need it most. I broke the seal. Inside was a letter written on fine paper. The letters penned in ink that had faded, but was still legible. I began to read, and the tears started to fall before I could stop them. "My dear Elijah, if you are reading this, it means you found what I left for you. And if you found it, it means you need it. I know what it's like to be betrayed by those you trust. It happened to me with my business partner in 1945. He took everything, my business, my savings. He even tried to take your grandmother. The pain of that betrayal almost destroyed me, but I learned something important. Bad men can take everything they see, but they can never take what they don't know exists." The letter continued. "I opened this account in secret in 1948 with the last $50 I had left. It was all I had in the world, but I didn't open it for myself. I opened it for you, for the grandson who hadn't been born yet, but whom I knew would come someday. I knew that time and interest would do their work. I knew that someday, when you needed it most, this account would be here waiting for you. Because true wealth is not what you show to the world. It is what you guard in silence for the dark times. Elijah, if you are reading this in a moment of pain, I want you to know something. Betrayal hurts because we love deeply. But that same love that makes us vulnerable also makes us strong. Do not let bitterness consume you. Use this money not to seek revenge, but to rebuild yourself. Use your pain as fuel, not as poison. And always remember, the ones who betrayed you have already lost, because they lost a man of honor. And that is something no amount of money can buy." The letter ended with a line that broke me completely. "Be the man I know you can be. Be the man I could no longer be. I love you even before I met you. Your grandfather, Frederick." I folded the letter and pressed it against my chest, sobbing. Joseph had the decency to look away, giving me a moment of privacy in my emotional breakdown. My grandfather had foreseen everything, as if he knew that one day I would be betrayed, as if he had seen the future and left this lifeboat waiting for me at the exact moment I would need it. Joseph waited until I composed myself. He offered me a tissue and a glass of water. "Mr. Hawthorne, we'll need to process some documents to transfer the funds to an active account in your name. For an amount of this size, the process may take a few days. I would also recommend hiring a financial advisor and probably an attorney to handle the legal aspects." An attorney. The word made me smile bitterly. I had had enough of attorneys. But Joseph was right. I needed to protect this. I needed to ensure that no one, especially Camilla and Ethan, could touch this money. "Is there any way to keep this confidential?" I asked. Joseph nodded. "Absolutely. Banking privacy laws are very strict. No one will know about this account unless you reveal it. and I would strongly advise you not to do so until you have all the necessary legal protection. It was exactly what I needed to hear, because in that moment, holding my grandfather's letter and looking at the bank statement that would change my life, I understood something fundamental. This wasn't just a second chance. It was an opportunity to serve justice the right way. I left the bank 3 hours later with a folder full of documents and a secret that weighed more than any fortune. $127 million. The figure swirled in my head like a whirlwind. I walked the streets aimlessly, trying to process what had just happened. People passed by me, completely unaware that the old man in the wrinkled suit walking among them had just become a multimillionaire. I was surreal. Just 24 hours earlier, I was figuring out how to pay the next month's rent. Now, I had more money than I could spend in several lifetimes. But something in me had changed. I didn't feel euphoria. I didn't feel the urge to celebrate or to spend. I felt something much deeper and darker. I felt clarity. For the first time in months, my mind was completely clear. And in that clarity, I understood exactly what I had to do. Camilla and Ethan had taken everything from me because they thought I had nothing left to lose. They were wrong. And now, I was going to show them just how expensive it is to underestimate a man who has hit rock bottom and found gold instead of darkness. The first thing I did was move, not to an ostentatious mansion or a luxury penthouse. That would have drawn attention. I moved to a modest but respectable apartment in a quiet neighborhood. 2 bedrooms, clean, with good natural light. Nothing that screamed money. I bought simple furniture, normal clothes, and kept my old car. Because the most important lesson I learned from my grandfather was this: true wealth is invisible. And I needed to be invisible while I prepared my next move. I hired an attorney, but not just any attorney. I researched for weeks until I found the best specialist in legal fraud and professional malpractice in the state. A man named Robert Bob Kingsley, with an impeccable reputation and a 92% success rate in cases against corrupt lawyers. He was expensive, charging $500 an hour, but now I could afford him. We met in his office, a sober place with walls full of degrees and awards. I told him my entire story, every detail of the divorce, every lie, every falsified document. Robert listened in silence, taking occasional notes. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and looked at me with a serious expression. "Mr. Hawthorne, what you're describing to me is a clear case of legal malpractice and possible fraud. If we can prove that the attorney, Ethan Vance, falsified documents and manipulated the judicial process, not only could we reverse the divorce, but he would face criminal charges." I nodded. "That's exactly what I want. But I need this to be done quietly. No one can know I have resources until the time is right." Robert smiled for the first time. "I understand perfectly. And coincidentally, I have a few contacts who could help us." Over the next few weeks, Robert set in motion a silent but relentless machine. He hired a top-level private investigator, someone who knew how to get information without leaving a trace. The investigator started following Ethan, reviewing his past cases and talking to former clients. And what he found was better than I had expected, much better. It turned out I wasn't Ethan's only victim. Over the last 10 years, he had manipulated at least 7 other divorce cases using similar tactics: falsified documents, paid witnesses, and fabricated evidence. He always got away with it because his victims ended up so financially and emotionally destroyed that they had no resources to fight back. But we had resources, and more importantly, we had patience. The investigator compiled testimonies from those other victims. Some agreed to speak when they learned that someone was finally coming after Ethan. Others were afraid, but with time and the guarantee of legal protection, they began to open up. We also found something interesting about Camilla. It turned out that she and Ethan had been planning this for more than 3 years. Emails, text messages, call records, everything meticulously saved on servers they thought no one would check. The investigator was good at his job, very good. He gained legal access to records that showed suspicious money transfers, secret meetings, and even photographs of them together dating back long before I suspected anything. The evidence was overwhelming, but Robert advised me to wait. We have to build an airtight case. If we move too fast, Ethan could destroy evidence or flee. We need every piece in place before we strike. So I waited. And while I waited, I did something else. I began to rebuild my relationship with my children, but not in the obvious way. I didn't call them begging for forgiveness or trying to buy their affection. Instead, I hired a different investigator to find out what was happening in their lives. I discovered that Brianna was having trouble at work. A superior was harassing her, and she didn't know how to handle it without risking her career. Marcus had invested in a business that was failing and had debts he couldn't pay. Camilla, of course, wasn't helping them. She was too busy spending my money with Ethan. So I did something they would never expect. I helped my children anonymously. Through legal intermediaries, I made sure that Brianna's superior was investigated and eventually fired. It wasn't difficult. The man had a history of harassment that the company had ignored. He just needed someone to bring it to light. For Marcus, it was more complicated. His business needed a significant capital investment to survive. So I created a shell company and offered him exactly that. He never knew that the silent investor who saved his business was his own father. The investigator kept me informed of their reactions. Brianna was relieved and confused by her sudden good luck. Marcus was grateful, but suspicious of why anyone would invest in his small company. But neither of them connected the dots back to me. 6 months passed. 6 months of living in the shadows, building my case piece by piece, helping my children without their knowledge. And during that time, I watched Camilla and Ethan enjoy their victory. They moved into my largest house, the one with the ocean view. They hosted lavish parties, traveled to Europe, and posted photos on social media showing their perfect life. And every photo, every fake smile, every display of stolen wealth only strengthened my resolve. Robert finally called me to his office. "We're ready," he said with a smile that let me know the news was good. He spread a thick folder across his desk. "We have enough evidence to prosecute Ethan for fraud, falsification of documents, and legal malpractice in 8 different cases, including yours. We also have proof that Camilla was an active accomplice in your specific case, which makes her vulnerable to criminal charges." I opened the folder. There were hundreds of pages. Emails where Ethan and Camilla planned every detail of how to destroy me, to testimonies from witnesses admitting they had been paid to lie, forensic analyses of the documents Ethan had presented as evidence, showing the signatures had been forged. "What's next?" I asked. Robert leaned back in his chair. "We present all of this to the district attorney. With this amount of evidence, they will issue arrest warrants. Simultaneously, we file a motion to annul your divorce based on procedural fraud. The judge will have no choice but to grant a hearing, and when that happens, everything they took from you will be returned. The houses, the cars, the money, everything." I smiled for the first time in almost a year. I smiled with true satisfaction. "How long will it take?" Robert looked at his calendar. "If we move fast, we could have the arrest warrants in 2 weeks. The hearing to annul the divorce would take another month. "Let's do it," I said. And so, the end began. Robert presented all the evidence to the district attorney's office on a Monday morning. By Wednesday, the DA had reviewed the case and was horrified by the level of corruption. "This is one of the most severe malpractice cases I've ever seen," he told Robert. "We are going to proceed with criminal charges immediately." The arrest warrants were issued the following Friday, but Robert and I decided to wait for the perfect moment to execute them. Camilla and Ethan were planning a huge party that night, a celebration of their first official anniversary as a couple. They had invited 100 people, the city's elite. Everyone would be drinking expensive champagne, eating gourmet food, and celebrating their love while stomping on the ruins of my former life. The night of the party arrived with a clear sky and bright stars. I wasn't invited, obviously, but I had eyes everywhere. The investigator had placed discreet contacts among the catering staff. He sent me updates every hour. Camilla wore a white dress. Ironic, considering the circumstances. Ethan looked smug in an expensive tuxedo, smiling like the cat who ate the canary. The guests arrived in luxury cars, all oblivious to the fact that they were celebrating in a house built on lies and falsified documents. At 9 o'clock that night, when the party was at its peak, when the champagne glasses were flowing and the music filled the air, 3 unmarked black cars stopped in front of the entrance. Federal agents and local police officers got out. They carried the arrest warrants. The investigator called me at that moment. "They're going in now." I could hear the background music, the laughter, and then a sudden silence. "Ethan Vance is under arrest for fraud, falsification of documents, and conspiracy." The agent's voice sounded clear and professional. "Camilla Rourke is under arrest for complicity in fraud and conspiracy to commit procedural fraud." The investigator described the scene to me. Camilla had dropped her champagne glass. The crystal shattered against the marble floor with a sound that sliced the silence like a knife. Ethan tried to negotiate using his lawyer voice, trying to intimidate the officers with empty legal threats, but the orders were clear, and the evidence was irrefutable. They were handcuffed in front of 100 witnesses. Guests pulled out their phones, recording everything. By morning, the video would be all over social media. The public humiliation was total and perfect. "How is Camilla?" I asked. I needed to know. The investigator paused. "She's crying. She's asking for her children. She says this is a mistake, that someone is framing them." I closed my eyes. A small part of me, the part that had loved her for 35 years, felt something akin to pity. But it was a very small part. The rest of me only felt the cold satisfaction of justice served. "Thanks for the report," I said, and hung up. I sat in my modest apartment that night with a cup of hot tea in my hands and reflected on what had just happened. I didn't feel explosive triumph or overflowing joy. I felt peace, a deep peace that comes from knowing that the universe, though slow, eventually balances the scales. My grandfather was right. The ones who betrayed me had already lost, long before they were arrested, because they lost their integrity, their humanity, their ability to look at themselves in the mirror without shame. The next day, the newspapers exploded with the news. Prominent attorney arrested for mass fraud. The articles detailed years of legal manipulation, destroyed victims, and ruined lives. My case was mentioned as one of the most atrocious. Online comments were brutal. The people who once admired Ethan now despised him. Camilla was described as his calculating accomplice. The same people who had attended their party were now posting messages of indignation, conveniently forgetting they had been drinking champagne in a house bought with stolen money. Robert called me that afternoon. "The hearing to annul the divorce is scheduled for 3 weeks from now. With the arrests and all the evidence we have, it's virtually a done deal. You'll get everything back. I thanked him for his work and hung up. But recovering my material possessions wasn't my priority. There was something much more important I needed to recover: my children. That night, Brianna called me. It was the first time I had heard her voice in almost a year. She was crying. "Dad, I saw the news. I didn't know. Mom told us so many things, and we believed her." Her voice broke. I didn't interrupt her. I let her cry. I let her process. I let her feel the weight of what she had done. When she finally calmed down, I spoke softly. "Brianna, your mother manipulated you just like she manipulated me. I don't blame you. You were her children, and you wanted to believe her. I would have done the same thing in your place." She sobbed louder. "We were so cruel to you. We turned our backs on you when you needed us most. How can you forgive us?" I closed my eyes. Because I love you. And real love forgives, even when it hurts. But I need you to understand something. Forgiveness doesn't mean everything goes back to the way it was before. We'll have to rebuild our relationship from scratch. And that will take time. Marcus called me an hour later. His tone was different from Brianna's. There was shame, but also something else. Respect. "Dad, the investor who saved my business? That was you, wasn't it?" I didn't answer directly. "Does it matter who it was?" He paused for a long time. "Yes, because it means that even when we turned our backs on you, when we abandoned you at your worst moment, you kept taking care of us. Not because you expected anything in return, but because that's what real fathers do." His voice broke. "I'm sorry, Dad. God, I am so sorry. I told them both that we would see each other soon, that we would talk about everything calmly, but that now I needed time to process my own healing." They understood, or at least they said they understood. Time would show if they truly did. The hearing to annul the divorce arrived faster than expected. The courtroom was the same one where I had lost everything a year ago, but this time I was different. I walked in with my head held high, wearing a new, well-pressed suit, with Robert at my side, carrying 3 thick folders of evidence. The judge was different, an older woman with a wise gaze, who reviewed the case with meticulous care. Camilla and Ethan were not present. They were still in jail, awaiting trial. Their defense attorneys looked defeated before the hearing even began. They knew they had no case. Robert presented all the evidence: the falsified documents with forensic analyses, the testimonies of witnesses admitting they had been paid to lie, the emails where Camilla and Ethan planned every detail, and Ethan's previous victims testifying about identical tactics. The judge listened to everything in silence, her expression growing sterner with each piece of evidence. When Robert finished, the judge removed her glasses and looked directly at us. In my 30 years as a judge, I have rarely seen a case of procedural fraud so blatant and calculated. What was done to Mr. Elijah Hawthorne was not just an unfair divorce. It was a systematic robbery, orchestrated through the manipulation of the legal system. She paused, letting her words resonate. This court annuls the divorce in its entirety. All marital property, assets, and custody agreements are declared null and void. Furthermore, I order a complete investigation into the judge who presided over the original case for possible complicity or gross negligence. The gavel struck the table. The sound was different this time. It was not the sound of my world collapsing. It was the sound of justice. Finally being served. I walked out of that courthouse with my properties legally restored, my name cleared, and something more valuable than any material possession. I walked out with my dignity intact. Because I never succumbed to bitterness, I never sought violent revenge. I simply let the truth do its work. And the truth, as always, was more powerful than any lie. That night, I returned to my modest apartment. I could have moved back into one of my recovered houses immediately, but I decided to wait. I wanted to savor this moment. I wanted to remember what it felt like to be at the bottom before returning to the top, because that memory would keep me humble. It would remind me that fortune can change in an instant, and that the only thing that truly matters is who you are when no one is looking. The following days were a strange mixture of legal resolution and personal healing. The 3 houses were returned to my name. The wars, though Camilla and Ethan had used them for a year, were still registered under my property. Thanks to legal technicalities Robert handled brilliantly. The bank accounts were more complicated because they had spent millions, but the court ordered the return of everything that remained, plus compensation for damages. It wasn't that I needed that money. I still had the $127 million from my grandfather's account, untouched, waiting silently. I decided not to reveal that account. Not yet, perhaps never, because I had learned the most valuable lesson of my life. Visible money makes you a target. Invisible money makes you invincible. I moved it back into my main house, the one with the ocean view, but something had changed in me. The rooms that once filled me with pride now felt empty. The expensive furniture, the artwork, the marble floors, everything seemed superficial. I had lived in a 1-bedroom apartment and had been just as happy, perhaps happier, because in that apartment there were no ghosts of past betrayals. I hired a deep cleaning company, not just to clean physically, but symbolically. I wanted to erase every trace of Camilla and Ethan from that space. I donated the furniture they had used. I repainted the walls, changed the locks, obviously, but I also changed the energy of the place. When they were finished, the house felt new, like a blank canvas awaiting a second chance. Brianna and Marcus came to visit me on a Saturday afternoon. It was awkward at first. We sat in the living room, the same place where we used to have family dinners, and the silence weighed like a rock between us. Brianna spoke first. "Dad, I don't even know where to begin to apologize." I raised a hand to stop her. "Start by being honest with me and yourselves. Why did you believe me capable of what your mother said?" Marcus looked at the floor. "Because it was easier to believe her than to face the possibility that she had lied to us our whole lives. If Mom could lie about you, it meant she could lie to us about anything, and that was terrifying." His honesty surprised me. "And also," Brianna continued, her voice trembling, "because money was involved. Mom promised us part of the inheritance if we supported her, and we accepted." The silence that followed was dense. I appreciated their honesty, but it hurt to hear it. My own children had sold me out for money. "And now?" I asked. "Now that you know the truth, how do you feel?" Brianna started to cry. "I feel dirty, like I betrayed everything you taught me about integrity. You paid for my college, my medical residency. You supported me every step of the way, and I turned my back on you for a check I didn't even need." Marcus nodded. "Me too. And the worst part is that you kept helping us even when we abandoned you." The investigator confirmed it for me. "It was you who saved Brianna's business with that superior. It was you who invested in my company." I looked at both of them. My imperfect children, selfish in their moment, but finally able to face their mistake. "I forgive you," I said simply. But forgiveness doesn't mean everything goes back to the way it was before. We will have to rebuild trust, and that will take time, maybe years. Are you willing to do that work? They both nodded, and tears in their eyes. Whatever it takes, Marcus said. However long it takes, Brianna added. And so, the slow process of family healing began. It wasn't easy or fast. There were difficult conversations, awkward silences, and moments where the pain of the past resurfaced like an unexpected wave. But gradually, week after week, we began to find a new rhythm. Meanwhile, the criminal case against Camilla and Ethan moved forward. The DA had built a solid case, with the 8 previous victims testifying. The media covered every detail of the trial. Ethan tried to negotiate a guilty plea in exchange for a reduced sentence, but the DA rejected the offer. They wanted a full trial, a public example of what happens when lawyers corrupt the system. The trial lasted 3 weeks. I attended every day of testimony, not for revenge, but for closure. I needed to see it through, to see justice work as it should have from the beginning. Camilla looked different at the trial. No expensive makeup, no designer dresses, just the orange prison uniform that crushed any pretense of glamour. She looked at me once from the defendant's stand. Our eyes met, and I saw something I hadn't expected. Real regret. Not the performative kind that people show to reduce their sentence, but something deeper. The realization that she had destroyed 35 years of shared life for greed and lust. I looked away, not because I hated her, but because I no longer felt anything for her. And that indifference was more definitive than any hate. Ethan, on the other hand, never showed remorse. Even when witnesses described how he had ruined their lives, he remained impassive, arrogant, convinced that his intelligence would save him from the consequences. But cunning intelligence is just a sharp tool in dangerous hands, and the legal system, though slow, eventually cuts those who try to manipulate it. The verdict arrived on a rainy Friday. The jury deliberated for only 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Ethan was sentenced to 20 years in prison without possibility of parole for the first 10. Camilla received 8 years for complicity. When the judge read the sentences, Ethan finally lost his composure. He shouted that it was unfair, that he had contacts, that this wasn't over. Guards had to forcibly remove him while he continued screaming empty threats. I left the courthouse that day and breathed the fresh afternoon air. The rain had stopped, and the sun was beginning to appear through the clouds. Symbolic, I thought. Robert waited for me on the steps. "Justice served," he said with a satisfied smile. "Justice served," I repeated. But I knew that the real justice hadn't been the prison sentence. It had been the process of keeping my integrity intact while the world collapsed around me. That was the real victory. With the criminal case closed and my properties restored, I finally had time to think about the future. What does a 70-year-old man do with $127 million and a second chance at life? I could have traveled the world, bought more properties, and lived in excessive luxury, but none of that called to me. Instead, I remembered my grandfather's words in his letter. "Use this money not to seek revenge, but to rebuild yourself." I had accomplished the first part. Now it was time for the second. I decided to create a foundation. I named it the Frederick Hawthorne Foundation in honor of the man who had foreseen my downfall and planted the seed of my salvation 77 years earlier. The foundation's mission was simple but powerful: to help victims of fraudulent divorce and legal malpractice, to provide free legal resources to people who couldn't afford high-quality attorneys, to create a support system for those who had been destroyed by the very system that was supposed to protect them. I invested $20 million initially in the foundation. I hired the best attorneys, investigators, and social workers. We opened offices in 5 major cities. In the first year, we helped 43 people overturn fraudulent divorces or prosecute corrupt lawyers. Every case won was a small victory against systemic injustice, and every person helped was a reminder of why I had survived my own nightmare, not to accumulate wealth, but to use that wealth as a tool for real change. The foundation grew faster than I had anticipated. The stories of people destroyed by unscrupulous lawyers were countless. Every week, dozens of requests for help arrived. Mothers who had lost their children due to false accusations, fathers financially ruined by manipulated divorces, and elderly people stripped of their life savings by corrupt legal guardians. Each story was a mirror of my own experience, and each one reinforced my commitment to this mission. I hired Robert as the foundation's legal director. He accepted enthusiastically, saying that in 30 years of his career, he had never had the opportunity to do so much good with such financial backing. Most victims of legal fraud lose not just for lack of evidence, but for lack of resources to fight, he explained, while we reviewed cases in his new office. With the foundation, we are leveling the playing field. We are giving ordinary people the same weapons the rich have always had: access to real justice. One of the first cases the foundation handled was that of a woman named Gloria. She was 62, and her story was chilling in its similarity to mine. Her husband had conspired with a female lawyer to take everything from her in the divorce. They had taken her house, her savings, even her small flower shop that she had operated for 20 years. When she came to our offices, she looked defeated, with the vacant gaze of someone who had lost hope. Robert and his team reviewed her case and found the same tactics Ethan had used on me: falsified documents, paid witnesses, and procedural manipulation. It took 6 months, but we won her case. The divorce judgment was annulled, her properties restored, and the corrupt lawyer faced criminal charges. The day Gloria got the keys back to her shop, she came to the foundation with a bouquet of fresh flowers. Tears were in her eyes as she handed them to me. "Mr. Hawthorne, you gave me back my life. Not just my shop or my house. You gave me back my faith that there are still good people in the world." I had tears in my eyes too. "Gloria, I only did for you what someone did for me 77 years ago. I'm paying forward a debt to my grandfather." And stories like Gloria's multiplied. Every successful case brought more attention to the foundation. The media began covering our work. Newspapers wrote articles about the avenging angel of unjust divorces. Television programs invited me for interviews. At first, I rejected all of the invitations. I wasn't looking for fame or recognition, but Robert convinced me to accept a few. "Your story has power," he told me. "If you share it, you'll inspire more victims to seek help and put pressure on the legal system to reform." He was right. I accepted an interview on a national news program. The journalist, a serious woman in her 40s, asked me how I felt about Camilla and Ethan now that they were in prison. "I don't feel satisfaction in seeing them incarcerated," I answered honestly. "I feel relief that they can't harm more people, and I feel sadness for the waste of human potential. Ethan could have been a great lawyer helping people. Camilla could have been a faithful partner, but they chose the easy path of greed, and now they pay the price." The interview went viral. Millions of people watched and shared it. The comments were overwhelmingly positive. People sharing their own stories of betrayal and divorce, others praising my measured response and lack of bitterness. Some critics said I should be angrier, more vengeful. But I had learned something crucial during my year in hell. Bitterness is a poison you take yourself, hoping it will kill your enemy. And I refused to poison myself. The media exposure brought something unexpected: letters. Hundreds of letters from people thanking my work, sharing their stories, and offering donations to the foundation. One particular letter touched my heart. It was from a woman in her 70s who had lost everything in a fraudulent divorce 30 years earlier. "I could never recover," she wrote in shaky handwriting, "but knowing that you are helping others gives me peace. It makes me feel that my suffering was not completely in vain if it inspired someone like you to create this foundation." I replied personally, thanking her for sharing her story and offering support if she still needed it. While the foundation flourished, my relationship with Brianna and Marcus also healed slowly. We started with weekly dinners, careful conversations where we rebuilt trust word by word. Marcus brought his wife, a kind woman who hadn't been present during the divorce, and treated me without the weight of guilt. Brianna eventually introduced me to her boyfriend, a school teacher, who reminded me of myself when I was young, hardworking, honest, and unpretentious. One Sunday, after a particularly pleasant dinner, Brianna asked me a question she had been avoiding. "Dad, how did you survive that year? When you lost everything, when you were alone in that horrible apartment, what kept you going?" I thought carefully before answering. Honestly, there were days when I didn't want to go on. Days when the pain was so great, I just wanted to give up. But then I remembered something my grandfather told me when I was a boy. He told me that the strongest trees grow in the fiercest winds, that adversity doesn't destroy you if you don't let it. It refines you. Marcus listened intently. "But you didn't know about Grandpa's account then, did you? You kept going without knowing there was salvation waiting for you." I nodded. Exactly. And that's the most important lesson. You can't live waiting for miracles. You have to keep walking, even in the deepest darkness, trusting that you'll eventually find light. Sometimes that light comes from unexpected places, but you only find it if you keep walking. Brianna had tears in her eyes. "We failed you when you needed us most, and yet you forgave us." "How?" "Because forgiveness is not a gift for you," I explained. "It's a gift for me. Bitterness would have destroyed me more effectively than anything Camilla or Ethan did. Forgiving them freed me. It allowed me to move forward without carrying that weight." The silence that followed was comfortable, contemplative. We were healing, not completely, perhaps never completely, but enough. Enough to be a family again. Different from the one we were before, but perhaps stronger, precisely because we had been broken and rebuilt. The foundation completed its first year of operation. We organized a gala to celebrate and raise more funds. 150 people attended, including several of the people we had helped. Gloria was there with her husband, reconciled after he discovered she had been a victim of legal manipulation. A young man who had regained custody of his children after we proved his ex-wife had falsified evidence of abuse. An elderly couple who had recovered their retirement home from a corrupt guardian. When it was my turn to speak, I stood in front of the microphone and looked at the audience. Every face represented a story of pain transformed into hope. 2 years ago, I began, I was sitting in a miserable apartment, convinced that my life was over. I had lost my family, my fortune, and my reputation. The only thing I had left was my integrity. And I held on to it like a shipwrecked man clings to a piece of wood in the middle of the ocean. I paused, letting the words resonate. But it turns out that integrity is the only thing you truly need. Because integrity attracts help. It attracts opportunities, it attracts justice, and eventually, it attracts peace. This foundation exists because my grandfather, Frederick, had the wisdom to plant a seed 77 years ago. A seed that grew in silence, waiting for the exact moment it would be needed most. Now, we are planting seeds. Every person we help, every case we win, every life we rebuild is a seed that will grow and flourish in ways we cannot predict. And that, I concluded, with an emotional voice, is the true legacy. Not the money we leave behind, but the lives we touch. The applause was deafening and sincere. People stood up. Some were crying. Others smiled with that smile that comes from finding hope where there was only despair. As I stepped off the stage, Brianna and Marcus were waiting for me. They hugged me together, something they hadn't done since they were small children. "We're proud of you, Dad," Brianna whispered. And in that moment, I felt that I had finally come full circle. I had lost everything and recovered it. But more importantly, I had gained something I never had before: true purpose. The following months brought more changes. The foundation opened offices in 10 more cities. We established a training program for young lawyers who wanted to specialize in defending victims of legal fraud. We created a 24-hour crisis hotline for people in distress, and we began lobbying for legislative reforms that would make it harder for corrupt lawyers to manipulate the system. It was exhausting work, but deeply satisfying. Every day, I woke up with a clear purpose. I was no longer building wealth for vanity or security. I was building something that transcended my own life. One day, I received an unexpected letter. It was from Camilla. It was handwritten on prison paper, the handwriting shaky but legible. "Eli," she began unceremoniously, "I know I don't deserve your time or your attention. I know what I did was unforgivable, but I need you to know something. In these past 2 years in prison, I've had a lot of time to think, to really see who I became and how I destroyed the one good thing in my life: our marriage." I continued reading with a mix of curiosity and caution. "I'm not seeking your forgiveness. I don't deserve it, and I don't expect it. But I want you to know that I am sorry. I'm sorry I betrayed you. I'm sorry I poisoned our children against you. I'm sorry I wasted 35 years of real love for an empty fantasy with a man who only used me." The letter continued. "I've seen the news about your foundation, about how you are helping people the way I should have been, victims instead of perpetrators. And it fills me with shame, but also something akin to pride. Because even after everything I did to you, you are still the honorable man you always were. And that makes me face how much I lost by letting you go." It ended with a simple line: "I hope you find the peace I never deserved. Camilla." I folded the letter slowly. I felt neither rage nor triumph. I felt something more complex: sadness for the waste of a life that could have been different, but also gratitude that she finally saw the truth, even if it was too late. I didn't reply to the letter, not because I was cruel, but because there was nothing to say. Some things simply end, and adding more words doesn't change that. But I kept the letter, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that even the people who hurt us the most are human, capable of repentance, even if that repentance comes late. That night, I sat in the study of my house, the same room where years ago I had listened to Camilla conspire on the phone with Ethan. But now, the space felt different. I had replaced the dark furniture with lighter pieces. The walls that once showcased my business success now displayed photographs of the foundation. People smiling after getting their lives back. Young lawyers graduating from our training program, and families reunited after years of forced separation. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out my grandfather Frederick's original letter. I had read it hundreds of times, but each reading revealed new layers of wisdom. Bad men can take everything they see, but they can never take what they don't know exists. I smiled, remembering those words. My grandfather wasn't just referring to the hidden money. He was referring to inner strength, integrity, and the ability to stay true to your principles, even when the world conspires against you. Those were the true, invisible riches. I thought about everything that had happened in the past 3 years. The devastating betrayal, the total loss, the miraculous discovery, and the slow rebuilding. And I realized something profound. If I could go back and prevent all the pain, would I? The answer surprised me. No, I wouldn't. Because that pain transformed me from a successful but superficial man into someone with real purpose. It taught me empathy I never had when my life was easy. It showed me who I really was when everything external was taken away. And that lesson was worth more than any amount of money. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Robert. Eli, I have news. The governor just signed the reform bill we were pushing. From now on, all divorces with assets over $1 million require independent review by a panel of judges. And any lawyer accused of procedural manipulation will face automatic investigation by the Bar Association. It was a huge victory. Years of lobbying, testimonies, and public pressure had finally paid off. Robert, this is incredible. How many lives do you think this law will save? He paused thoughtfully. Impossible to say, but every life it saves is a life that won't have to go through what you went through, and that makes it invaluable. That night, I hosted a small dinner at my house. Brianna, Marcus, their partners, and a few key members of the foundation team. We cooked together, something we had never done when I was rich and successful. Before, we had chefs and staff. Now we had laughter in the kitchen as Brianna burned the onions and Marcus tried to save the sauce. It was chaotic and perfect. During dinner, I raised my glass. I wanted to make a toast to my grandfather, Frederick, who had the wisdom to plant a seed he wouldn't live to see grow. To the brave people who share their stories of pain to help others. To my children, who had the courage to admit their mistakes and work to make amends. And to all of us, for choosing every day to be better than we were yesterday. The glasses clinked with that crystalline sound that marks important moments. And as I looked at the faces around the table, I realized that this was true wealth. Not the 127 million in the bank, not the houses or the cars, but these human connections, rebuilt after being broken, stronger precisely because they had survived the fracture. After dinner, when everyone had left, I walked out to the ocean view terrace. The moon shone over the water, creating a silver path to the horizon. The salty air filled my lungs. I was 73 years old. I had lived several lives in one. Successful entrepreneur, betrayed husband, ruined man, miraculous heir, philanthropist, and forgiving father. And through it all, I had learned the most important lesson. Time is the greatest ally of the unjustly wronged. Not because it guarantees revenge, but because it guarantees perspective. Time shows you that the people who betrayed you betrayed themselves first. that they lost much more than they took from you, that the real victory is not in watching them fall, but in remaining standing without becoming what they are. I recalled the last words of my grandfather's letter. Be the man I know you can be. And I smiled because I finally understood what it meant. It didn't mean being perfect. It meant being whole. It meant getting up every time you fall. It meant forgiving when it's hardest. It meant using your pain as fuel to help others, instead of as poison to destroy yourself. The ocean continued its eternal rhythm. Waves rolling in and receding, rolling in and receding. Constant, patient, unstoppable. Like justice, when it finally arrives. Like love, when it's real. Like hope, when you refuse to let go. I went inside the house, closed the door behind me, and went to sleep with a clear conscience. Because today, like every day since I found that forgotten account from 1948, I understood something fundamental. My grandfather didn't leave me money. He left me a lesson about patience, about faith, and about believing that even in the darkest moments, there are seeds planted long ago, waiting for the perfect moment to blossom. And those seeds, when they finally grow, don't just save you. They save everyone you touch afterward. That is the true miracle. Not the hidden fortune, but the ability to transform your worst nightmare into your life's greatest purpose. Did you like my story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you liked the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story with love and respect.